Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. We're rainy here in Providence. We're heading down to much better weather down in Charlottesville. Jennifer Lawless, the chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia. Professor, welcome.
Thank you. I'm
Is
happy
it
to be
sunny
here.
and balmy down there?
It is, but we're heading into 4 straight days of rain, so
Got it. Let's start up with the newly announced yesterday, I believe, presidential debate to be held, I believe, on June 27th, hosted by CNN, pairing off former President Donald Trump and sitting President Joe Biden. Were you surprised at the earliness of the debate, that it would be on CNN, and that the Trump team would sign off kind of on a lot of things that I would think the Biden team wanted?
yes, I mean, I was surprised that it all came together as quickly as it did. We didn't even really know there was a lot of wrangling behind the scenes, maybe because there wasn't much wrangling behind the scenes. The Trump team did agree to some strange features. So first, that it's on CNN. Second, they agreed to another debate with ABC, which is obviously not one of their favorite networks. But in addition to that, there's no audience, and the moderators will have the opportunity when they want to cut off the candidates' microphones. So those are all features that probably give an advantage to President Biden and are not consistent with the way that Donald Trump has previously debated. I do think that this highlights how important it is for Trump to be able to get out there, not in the front of a courtroom, but actually in a political event to communicate with the American public. And he's probably willing to accept things that he wouldn't have been willing to accept a few months ago because he feels like his campaign is so constrained given the hush money trial.
So let's walk through a couple scenarios. Scenario number one is, and it's hard to imagine, but let's just say he tries it. And he tries the statesman approach. And he says, listen, when I was president, I did this, this, and this. This is how the country benefited. Joe Biden, since you've been president, the country has had this and this and this happen. That's why I'm a better president. A, is he capable of that for his own benefit? And B, would that be the winning strategy for him?
Well, there's no evidence to suggest that he is capable of that. He's demonstrated that he's capable of being quite disciplined for a portion of a debate. He's never actually made it through the entire debate. But yeah, that's the message that he needs to hammer home because his base is not going to abandon him. This election is about independent voters, many of whom voted for him in 2016 and then did not in 2020. What he has to do is focus on the economy and pretend that COVID didn't happen and that it didn't happen under his watch. And what Joe Biden needs to do is highlight that he was part of the COVID recovery and that social issues under Joe Biden are much more protective of civil rights and civil liberties than they would be under Donald Trump. So the messages from both teams are not at all about the same content. So it's not about convincing people that Biden's better on the economy or that Trump is better on women's rights. It's about priming voters to think about these candidates with respect to different issues. And whoever makes the most compelling argument will likely win over those independents.
Joe Biden's best day probably in the last year was the State of the Union address. He was coherent, he was high energy. Donald Trump implied that he was on cocaine.
He didn't imply it, he actually said it.
Okay, he said Joe Biden had taken cocaine. Should Joe Biden, let's ask it this way, should Joe Biden take the cocaine again, I guess is the question.
He's got to, I mean, not take cocaine, but he's got to have the same kind of demeanor that he had at the State of the Union address. And I think it's possible for him to do that. He's demonstrated an ability to, in pretty, narrow time periods, be not only coherent, but very, very compelling and statesmanlike. And we've also seen over the course of the last 4 years that some of the times that he's the most animated, the most compelling, is when he actually is differentiating himself from Donald Trump and reflecting on what his presidency versus Trump's presidency did for the country. So these are good circumstances for Biden. The other reason that the timing is important is because although early voting starts, long before November, June is still early enough where it's unlikely that any major faux pas that either candidate makes in this debate will be so damning that it will affect election outcomes. So it's a way for, I think, both candidates to kind of jumpstart the summer, but the stakes are pretty low for both of them.
are both doubling down on their knowledge of Poland and whether what its position is behind the Soviet wall. Are they doubling down on some of those other areas? I mean, one train wreck can have a big effect. Is the June 27th date, especially for Joe Biden, protective that if he has A, a senior moment, or B, a factoid significant error, that gives him enough time to rebound?
It does. It also gives them a lot of preparation for what they need to do going into the September debate, where many more people will be, you know, making decisions based on what they see. It's also important to remember that hardly anyone watches these debates. So what these debates actually do is generate snippets for various media coverage, for campaign ads, for other candidates to talk about. And so, just the general role of debates has evolved over time. This is certainly not the only opportunity for people to see these candidates. It's not the only opportunity for journalists to ask them questions. So, it is somewhat surprising. The other thing that I should note is although the terms seem to favor Joe Biden, the fact that he's agreed to the debate suggests that he understands that Trump is ahead in the polls, especially in swing states, and that Biden needs to jumpstart the campaign and, give it a little bit of a kick. Because he had said earlier that he wasn't going to commit to debates. It was going to depend on how Donald Trump behaved. And if anything, Donald Trump's behavior over the course of the last few months has been worse than it had been prior to that. So, I think this has more to do with Joe Biden and less to do with Donald Trump.
I did see the clip of Ronald Reagan versus Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale is the former vice president to Jimmy Carter. They're running against each other. And it not only was the brilliance of the Reagan line of saying to Walter Mondale, I will not use your youth and inexperience against you. It was how he delivered it. He set it up so beautifully. He was so straight-faced. And then what ended the election right then and there was Walter Mondale laughing so hard at the line, which pretty much said, I just lost the election.
And the juxtaposition to that, I think, is when Lloyd Benson knocked down Dan Quayle by saying, I knew John Kennedy, you're no John Kennedy. And there, Quayle did not laugh. Quayle did not appreciate it. Quayle did win that election. But, I think these debates do provide an opportunity to show the human side of candidates. And Joe Biden thrives in that kind of environment, and Donald Trump does not.
Well, let's go to New York. Manhattan courtroom. Donald Trump is on day 692. I'm not sure what day it is. It's 3 weeks into this ongoing prosecution. Michael Cohen has performed better than the horrific performance that I think everyone expected him to do. Does Michael Cohen survive this thing?
Yeah, I think that for Michael Cohen, self-discipline is almost as big a problem as it is for Donald Trump. And we saw in the weeks prior to his own testimony that he was getting a little over the top on social media and in interviews, talking about Donald Trump, talking about his role as his fixer, and talking about the kinds of things he planned to say when he testified. Since he's been called, he's been far more disciplined. He's basically stuck to answering the questions. He hasn't provided that much in terms of editorial commentary, and he hasn't really given the defense anything that they've been seeking. So he's going to get all, I assume if he can manage another day or two on the stand, that he'll be the big winner in this trial.
So if you look at least the press reports, obviously none of us have been able to watch it, but if you scan all the different press reports of all the different media, you would come across with the following, and correct me if you think. First of all, it's a questionable case that this ever came forward. It did come forward. It appears that based on the law, Donald Trump has violated this statute, triggering a whole series of different charges, and that other than someone on the jury just feeling like this is a persecution, that the entire charges were unfair, or that they're a secret Trump lover, that the likelihood of him being convicted seems to be getting higher and higher as each day goes along.
I think that's right. I also think it was a difficult case because what the prosecution needs to do is not only demonstrate that there was hush money paid, that's not illegal. It's
Right.
that there was hush money paid in the context of a campaign to affect the campaign outcome. And so one of the challenges of this has been for the prosecution to make the case that Donald Trump paying Stormy Daniels off had nothing to do with his concern that Melania would be upset that he had an affair with a porn star or that his family would be upset. It had to do with the fact that he was concerned that after the Access Hollywood tape came out, this kind of story would further concerns of female voters, especially suburban women in battleground states. And so it's been a difficult way. So the prosecution has had to thread this very strange needle where they're demonstrating that this behavior is only illegal because of the time in which it was conducted. And that's tough, but it seems like the witnesses that they've put together and the documents that they've been able to assemble have allowed them to paint a pretty compelling picture. We'll see what arguments the defense has and the extent to which they're going to actually offer a very, very clear defense, or whether they're just going to make the claim that, the prosecution really didn't meet its burden.
And then the last question I've had, listen, you were on a couple of weeks ago. Things were pretty settled down at University of Virginia. We jinxed you 2 days later. You had the state police and tear gas. Campuses around the country, for the most part, have settled down and returned to some level of normalcy. I guess the big question is, as these campuses empty out, students leave, some on to graduation, but those who are returning in the fall, are we going to see a reactivation of this movement that we've seen across the country at so many colleges and universities? Are we going to see the disruption? Are we going to see protests? Are we going to see encampments? Are we going to see building takeovers?
Well, first, I should note, and I'm saying this not in any way to defend the police tactics, but the chemical irritant used was pepper spray, like copious amounts of pepper spray, not tear gas. So I just want to provide accuracy there. Not to say that that's acceptable. I think it depends on what happens over the summer in the Middle East. And it depends on what role the Biden administration plays in trying to bring an end to the conflict. It depends on whether Joe Biden continues to sort of straddle this line between not providing the weapons that Israel needs if they cross a certain line versus saying that they didn't cross that line. A lot of it comes down not to the actual conflict in Israel and Gaza, but to the way that this administration is handling that conflict and the extent to which they can help bring an end to it, or at least bring some degree of, a permanent stalemate and ceasefire. Now,
go ahead.
No, if he manages to do that, then I think when students come back, there's the possibility that we're not going to see this resurgence. If he does not do that, then it's going to, I would expect, be even more widespread, because the fall is a presidential election year and the stakes are higher than they are right now.
So in some cases in recent elections, younger voters have turned out and been important. Obama, some of these off-year elections relative to votes on abortion. But generally, from a demographic standpoint, younger voters underperform what the weight of their total numbers are. Is Joe Biden playing with a really dangerous of alienating important Jewish voters, big Democratic donors, big Democratic activists, for trying to play to the demands of a group who may or may not show up or vote regardless?
Well, first, I think that it's important to acknowledge that on both sides, whether you're talking about the Democratic donors who generally support Israel or the students who are concerned about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, there are very legitimate foreign policy concerns on both sides. And I think when Joe Biden and the administration are weighing those concerns, it's not only about who's going to be more likely to turn out on election day. So, I think the geopolitical atmosphere right now, and it's incredibly complicated. Now, I do think that there is something to be said about whether these young voters are going to ultimately affect the outcome of the campaign. First of all, because we don't know if they would have turned out to vote anyway. And second, it's unclear what their alternative is. At this point, it makes sense for them to say things like, well, we're not going to vote. not necessarily fully aware of the fact that that means they're helping Donald Trump win the election. When all of that comes into focus, they might be a little bit more inclined to change their minds. But I don't think that this is an explicitly political calculus on the part of the White House. I think there are just too many dynamics at play and too much uncertainty regarding voter turnout in general.
Karl Rove, Republican strategist, would know all those numbers and what the implications of all of those different variations would be.
I'm comfortable saying that I'm no Karl Rove.
Last but not least, what should we be looking at over the next couple weeks?
Well, the hush money trial obviously is, I think, at the top of the ticket. It's likely going to come to a close relatively soon, and this verdict is probably going to be the only verdict we see prior to the November election. So, how Donald Trump fares and how he handles the result is probably the only information that voters are going to have regarding the indictments before they have to cast their ballots. The other thing that I would say that we're already seeing coming into play is the competition for the vice presidency. It was like a terrible, bad episode of The Apprentice outside of the courthouse the other day when various Republicans seeking to be Donald Trump's vice president showed up, whether it was Vivek Ramaswamy or Doug Bergstrom or um, Janine Pirro was in the front row the other day. Basically, these are people who want to demonstrate that they are fully on board with Donald Trump. And although he is trying not to violate a gag order, they'll go out and they'll tell the media exactly what they think about the trial and all of the players and the witnesses, basically on Donald Trump's behalf. And so the extent to which that plays out, who he rewards, and whether he's ultimately held accountable for, some of the things that they're saying that are over the top is what I'll be looking for.
Jennifer Lawless, the chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia, thank you as always. For everybody else, stay tuned at about 12:30. Kate Nagel will be hosting the Bally's Lounge. She's got a local musical star coming in, so stay tuned for that at 12:30. And we've got news up and down the day. If you didn't see it, there's a major feature today highlighting Dan McKee as governor, what he promised to do and what he's been doing on the business side of the job. So stay tuned, catch up, and we'll have much more updates throughout the day. Thanks, everybody.